Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome to our third Capitalism Reimagined call. I think it's our 35th Agents of Impact call. Many of you are veterans now of all this. Let me just go over some of the housekeeping and then we'll jump right in. The call is recorded, as you know. We're going to keep the Zoom room open for a few minutes past the hour. So if you can hang out and it's a good time to network and trade contacts and other things in a more informal way. If you have to leave, obviously that's fine as well. The chat feature is open. I'm going to encourage you to introduce yourselves and maybe say where you're from. We're going to do a poll in a second, which I'll explain. And finally, this is one of the many benefits of being a subscriber. If you are not yet a subscriber or you have friends for some reason that are not yet subscribers, send them to impactalpha.com/subscribe. And there's a code VIP50 for this sort of post Black Friday, Giving Tuesday kind of season we're in, and you get 50% off the first year of the subscription. And so let your friends know that. Let me first just welcome everybody. Chris Jurgens from Omidyar Network, who's has supported these calls and supported ImpactAlpha in many ways. Thank you, Chris. Welcome.
Thanks, David. Good to be with you.
Carol Ann Hilton from the Indigenomics Institute and author of Indigenomics, and I think coming to us from Vancouver. Is that right?
Yes.
Carol Ann?
Yes.
Welcome. Eli Kasargod-Staub from Majority Action, a shareholder action organization seeking to hold corporations accountable. Hi, Eli.
Hi, so thrilled to be with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to have you. Amit Bouri from the Global Impact Investing Network. I know many of you will know him. Hi, Amit.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Meredith Sumpter from the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, and also the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And Meredith, you can tell us later the distinction. The coalition was founded by Lynn Forster de Rothschild, who's been very active in so many things. And the Council, as I understand, is working with the Vatican and Pope Francis. So welcome, Meredith.
Thanks for having me, David.
Thank you. Let's do actually the poll, Chris, because that'll get people in the mood, and then we'll just spring it on you a little bit by surprise. But if you read the brief the other day, we talked about warriors and lovers, and the folks in the New Capitalism Project, which you'll hear more about, sorted themselves out along a couple axes, from collaboration to confrontation and creation to destruction. And let me just give you the basic brief that I pulled from the New Capitalism Project material, and you can sort yourself out on this poll, and we'll then get a sense of who's in the room. So warriors, do we have the poll up, Isaac? Yeah, there's the poll. Warriors tend to move through confrontation in their change efforts, deploying tactics of campaigns, demonstrations, grassroots and community organizing. Lovers tend to work collaboratively and focus on building bridges across differences through voluntary means, shaping conversations, nudging business leaders, rewarding best practices. Entrepreneurs tend to sidestep all this tinkering with the current system to focus on building new futures, innovations, and approaches. And missionaries take on the status quo through their proximity to power and decision makers, finding allies in the establishment who share certain values. It's more of an inside game approach to making change. So sort yourself out. Let us know where you stand on those two axes, and we'll come back to the results in a little bit. Okay, that's to set you up, Chris, for a little bit of welcome and orientation of just why you and other funders decided to support the New Capitalism Project, and what you were hoping for at the get-go, and where we'll get to where it might go later. But sort of what's the setup here?
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks again for hosting and everyone for joining. It's great to be here on this third part of our trilogy on reimagining capitalism. We've talked about shifting ideas, shifting rules, shifting power in the system. And I think today is about how do we build a broad-based movement to make that change happen. And the short answer, David, to why we and other funders were interested in the new Capitalism Project and have supported it is that we need a diverse, broad-based coalition to reimagine capitalism and shift the role of business and finance within it. And this new Capitalism Project table brings together an amazing set of leaders from multiple fields to collaborate on a shared vision for change. And we'll hear from them today. But a bit more of the backstory, which I think is useful framing for the conversation, is that we started exploring this idea with Amit and Anna back in 2019. And it started from a reflection on how emerging movements grow and evolve, drawing experiences we'd personally been involved in fields like impact investing or that we'd seen change the world, like the movement for LGBT equality. And this kind of journey of starting with a set of pioneering actors, seeing more players enter a movement and that becoming more complex. And at some point in time, as a movement gains momentum, a set of leaders recognizing a need and opportunity to come together in some way, to coalesce around some shared sense of identity, purpose, vision for change. And the hypothesis in starting this journey was this field of movements focused on structural change to capitalism, the role of business and finance in that change, was reaching that kind of maturity and inflection point. And you all are a part of this on this call. We've seen the real diversity of actors increasing their focus on structural economic change in the last decade, but particularly in the last few years. From the diverse perspectives that David, you're framing teed up, the warriors, the lovers, the missionaries. So folks working collaboratively with business and trying to drive change by working within the system, actors that have come out of corporate campaigning and grassroots activism that are taking a confrontational approach and demanding accountability from corporate power and driving change through demanding action and accountability and that sort of frame. Actors that have kind of shifting business and finance and moving stakeholder capitalism forward as a core mission and mandate of what they do. And others that start with a mission and a diagnosis of the problem, starting with structural racism or the climate crisis or workers' rights, and seeing changing corporate and investor behavior as essential to getting to those end goals. And so the group of us involved in this saw this diversity of engagement as a real strength and opportunity, but also recognize the field is still pretty young, pretty fragmented, in some cases working in silos where you have actors that are pretty well connected within their spheres of influence, but not necessarily across the silos of kind of these inside game, outside game, climate, the E of ESG or the S of ESG sorts of different perspectives. And thought there could be an opportunity to bring together stakeholders from different perspectives to make sense of this growing complex field. And we all know that movements are really shaped by individual leaders, and so thought a good place to start was to create an opportunity and space for a group of leaders to come together, build stronger relationships, both share their own diagnoses of the structural shifts we need to see and the problem we're trying to address and their theories of change for addressing it, and see what opportunity there might be for coming together around some shared point of view of the problem, of the change that needs to happen, of what the field needs to move forward. So that's where things started, and let me hand it over to Amit and others to continue the story.
Good, that's great, and I do want to go to you, Amit, to give us, first of all, just a little bit. We tried to queue it up in the brief and in ImpactAlpha over the last week, but just to queue up what the new Capitalism Project is and sort of how you all work, but then more broadly, where it fits in not just the GINS strategy, but sort of in the field building. You've been involved, I know, from the get-go, and all the seminal early work, and then ever since, and you've seen the growth, and Chris kind of teed up the sort of step change that maybe we're at, and maybe you can explain how you see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, David and Chris. And I'm excited about the discussion I'll have with the fellow panelists and colleagues who are working on this project. I'll start with the second part of your question, David, and just talk a little bit about like what brought the GIN to be prioritizing this, given all the many things that we're working on. And I hope it resonates with others in the impact investing community and others who are just motivated around like kind of social and environmental change. In the early days of impact investing, we were very much trying to, establish the brand, and the GIN was very much trying to move more investors to allocate capital to what we define as impact investments. And many of you were part of this discussion around 2018, 2019, when we were working on kind of taking stock 10 years in of the GIN's journey of like what had this field building kind of effort, yielded, and where do we need to go for the next decade. And so this was work that kind of built on a project in 2008 and that was published in 2009 that the Modern Institute had led that was very important to like the creation of the strategy of the GIN, and that changed my career and changed the trajectory of many others. And so as we're reflecting on it, if you looked just at the impact investing market over that 10-year period from 2009 to 2018, it's a tremendous success. We'd seen more capital, it was more global, we saw much more diversity in terms of types of institutions, types of people, engagement of government, civil society groups and beyond. And if you looked at that alone, it was kind of beyond our wildest dreams, if you will. But if you zoomed out and look at the bigger picture, climate change had gotten much worse. Inequality had gotten worse in many places, and this is all pre-COVID, right? So and these have been exacerbated in the last couple of years. So it really begged the question of what does success mean in a failing system? And that led to a pretty big strategic pivot for the GIN that we published in our roadmap for the future of impact investing, which was really, we framed it around the future of financial markets, because we saw that if we were truly going to move the needle on these big systemic issues, we had to be thinking about the role that impact investing plays, not just in growing this great, kind of market, but also in influencing investing more broadly. So how does impact investing have an impact on investing itself? And so that led us to look at collaboration on a much broader scale, kind of beyond the impact investing stakeholders that are so important to our work. And we started to see a great opportunity, but also a lot of challenge. There are a lot of people who are thinking then about how to drive systems change coming from different dimensions. There's a whole kind of great constellation of initiatives out there, whether it's people focused on kind of promoting a well-being economy to inclusive capitalism, sustainable capitalism, regeneration, looking at restorative economics, and so many other kind of great activities. And it did feel like we were in a moment where systems change was on the table in a way that it hadn't been for years. I also saw a great risk, though, that all these great efforts, including the work that I was putting kind of all my time and all the GINs, all the great people the GIN were focused on, that what if this didn't add up to the systemic change that I think is possible? And so that led to some conversations with the Omidyar Network and with Ana Moyo, and we were really interested in how do we actually think about creating a more collaboration on the system change agenda. And it was also a time where we saw a lot of a much more diverse set of voices critiquing the current economic system. So it wasn't just the activists that were doing that, where I grew up in Northern California when I was a kid, but we now saw CEOs of major companies, billionaires from finance and from technology, Davos and many other kind of very elite circles were talking about the need to shift the system. But we hadn't yet populated, in my view at least, a very great narrative of what the future system should look like. So what are we aiming for? We're starting, there's debates about the critiques of the current system, but there's actually a growing consensus in many ways. But how do we best articulate where we need to go? And that's what really motivated the origin of the New Capitalism Project was, can we get a group of folks who come at this from very different vantage points, with very different resources, and in some cases, very different mindsets, to work to craft a common understanding of what's wrong with the system as it exists today, and also what is an end game that we all think we're working for. What is and it doesn't mean we have to ignore our differences, but rather is there kind of a common direction that we're moving towards, where we need to apply diversity of strategies and approaches. And that's what's really kind of led to the New Capitalism Project, of working with a design team many of my colleagues are, in that design team are on this call, to start to try to do this hard work of connecting and helping to build kind of a common point of view around some of these big issues. I will note before I turn it over is that one of the complexities that this was launched in March of 2020, and we obviously had no idea what the back half of that month would entail. And so it's been a very interesting, I think, very fulfilling collaborative process. But many of us hadn't actually met before. And so it was a very interesting kind of opportunity to help build collaboration, do this important work, a shared vision and a shared action agenda with folks that we were building new relationships with, all as the whole world was pivoting to going virtual. So I'll pause there and looking forward to the discussion.
Terrific. That's exactly what I wanted was the setup. But I want to take the two parts first. One is the diverse voices, and then the second is the vision, and then we'll get to where we're going next. But let's bring in everybody else. And just to be clear, as you said, there's a design team that the New Capitalism Project has pulled together. I think about a dozen folks, and they've been working over the course of this time, as you mentioned. And so the four people on the call here all are on that design team. In some sense, are standing in for the rest of the folks who couldn't make it. And maybe you can each just briefly say, why this project, why this table to come around, and maybe also identify whether you're a warrior or a lover or something else. Meredith, you want to jump in?
Sure, I would be happy to. So when the Coalition, the Council for Inclusive Capitalism were approached, I think, for me, what made this so important, I go back to what Amit just shared with us on what does success mean, or rather, how I think about it is what does it require in a failing system? And, we recognize the common synergies across our work, but we had not yet had the opportunity to come together with our respective work and explore how, with our differing approaches, we could more effectively push toward that shared goal of an economy that enables and works for everyone. So for me, I think being part of this project really was an opportunity to learn from my colleagues, to understand their perspectives and approaches, but also to appreciate and value the differences in our approaches. And then with that community that's now been developed, we have an opportunity to be more effective in how we work together, and whether that's in parallel or in direct collaboration to try to bring about that change that we need. And you asked me to identify myself. I'd say that for the coalition, the council, we are a mix of lover, entrepreneur, and missionary, but we newly respect and admire the work that our warrior colleagues do and making that change happen.
There you go. I don't know, Eli, you want to jump in?
Happy to. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm grateful to be back with my New Capitalism Project colleagues here.
I heard you guys referred to yourself as a bubble through all the Zoom calls. So
it was. I have to say, it turned out that one of the things that was so lovely about it, just on a personal level through the COVID time, was the breath of fresh air that you got to walk in and take by being with a group of people with whom you could just have a space to ask big questions and do so in collaboration in a moment where, like, many of us have just been trying to put one foot in front of the other. I really valued being in the New Capitalism Project working group, very much because of that diversity of perspectives that Meredith and Amit were just speaking to. We at Majority Action, I personally, really all of our staff here, we were very kind of firmly in the warrior mode, right? Thinking about how do we challenge incumbent players and practices that we see as perpetuating harm, particularly around corporate behavior and corporate governance. And what we know to be true is that outside, if you will, kind of outside strategies and inside strategies really work best when they work either in tandem or in dynamic tension with each other. And one of the things I really valued was being able to be in a space with colleagues that we were able to kind of suspend the like, okay, well, you think these people are okay to talk to, and so that means that we're not on the same team, but instead to say, actually, we're pushing here, you're pushing there. How can the whole be greater than the sum of the parts? It was a really interesting set of ideas and opportunities that came out from that.
Terrific. Carol Ann, why this table to join among the many, I'm sure many opportunities to many demands on your time, and why New Capitalism Project? What was in it for you, and what you're working on?
For sure. Thank you. It was a great experience, and what attracted me to this was essentially the intersection between power and impact. So many of us play within impact. Our own worldviews are built within that, our assumptions, the way we experience and live in the world, and understanding how we live and experience within power and the structures of those and how those are expressed within capitalism, I find particularly interesting. And to be able to participate at a level of conversations of honesty and uncomfortableness, to be able to really draw from whose perspective, from what assumptions are being drawn from. My work in Indigenomics of building Indigenous perspectives into economy is a lot about building upon the metaphor of taking a seat at the economic table, and who has been disinvited to having the seat at the economic table. When we realize that the work of this powerful conversations was really about expanding multiple possible futurisms, I think that extension into the power of the conversation to see outside of our own perspective, the space was created to hold those conversations and to be able to really bring meaning into that experience. My work in building an Indigenous perspective, there's a spiritual leaders from the Iroquois tradition who describes in a quote, essentially, where he says, "You've been trying to make us capitalists ever since you've arrived, but we don't value what you value." And I think there's such a distinction of what that plays into of what is valued in this conversation. And I think as we continue this and evolve the way that we see that and experience that, what and how we value is changing. And that's really, I think, the sweet spot and the PowerPoint in this conversation. Thank you.
Well, let's stay with us, Carol Ann. And one of the complications of this is you guys did so much work on teasing out both the nature of the problem and then also teasing out what these possible futures are, as you say. In the interest of sort of clarity and time, we're going to sort of refer people to read up on their own. We did I'll put the story we did the other day on that just scratched the surface of this. But in what ways did the vision that you crafted together, go too far, not far enough? I mean, one question I would just ask, and it comes off of the quote you just read, is, new capitalism. I mean, there's an assumption embedded in that about capitalism. I mean, how did you land on the vision that you all pulled together?
I think Amit spoke to that of just undoing the experience of success and imagining what success can look like with those existing barriers. To focus on the narrative shift really meant bringing in a perspective around purpose and meaning. When I refer to that concept of the uncomfortable space, we reference those cultural norms, the barriers, and even undoing language of how we currently used it, and to understand, while the big picture was responding to system fallout, as well as that kind of structural response to what needs are we meeting within our future, to be able to look at the end outcomes in terms of inclusivity, equitable participation, all of that needs to be dismantled from the perspective and view from which the seat at the table that you have, and to be able to look outside of yourself and to hear the experience of what that also needs to be. I think that was a formative narrative within the development of this project.
Terrific. I want to bring the others in, but actually let folks know the results of this poll, which was interesting to me. It was fairly evenly divided, but the clear, I wouldn't say winner, but the dominant, the biggest plurality was entrepreneur, and the smallest plurality was warrior. And then missionary and lover were essentially tied. So you can see, I think you can see the results there. So it was, I would have thought more warriors and I would have thought warriors and lovers would have dominated. But anyway, that's sort of interesting. Eli and Meredith, same question. Does the vision go far enough? Not far enough? How? You know, what stands out?
Happy to jump in. Then I'd love to. I always learn a lot from Eli and Carol Ann, so I'd love to hear Eli's views on this as well. But I think what was really grounding about the many discussions that we had about the vision, which then propelled our ideas of what we could do, both within our different archetypes and together to make progress toward that vision, was that, you know, we could all agree on, and this gets back to your post, David, you know, what does a good economy look like? It's one in which every person has the opportunity to reach their full potential and every community to thrive. But our experiences as individuals in an economic system and in a society differ by who we are, by our background, by our racial or gender or religious makeup. And therefore, I think although we could all agree on the end goal, our differences in approaches, our differences in experiencing that economy and what we expected from it, that was something that was incredibly meaningful for all of us. And we spent a great deal of time, I see Anne over there smiling, we spent a great deal of time going back and forth with drafts to try to get at the right language that would honor the experiences of every member of that group, and recognizing that we each experience the economy differently, and therefore what needs to change won't necessarily be the same for all of us. And so our solution driving conversations were stretched in ways that I think many of us had not accounted for at the outset. But first we had to recognize what that interaction with the economy felt like for our colleagues who might be experiencing that quite differently from ourselves.
One thing I can add to Meredith's and Caroline's beautiful descriptions here is just to double down on the emotional piece. Obviously, there was just a tremendous amount of work that went into going back and forth on language, months and months and months and months of work to which was such a luxury in a way to kind of dwell in language together in that way. And at the same time, you know, we are, as Meredith was saying, we all differently experience from each other and are at the same time are collectively experiencing at full blast a broken world and a broken economy. And the emotional experience of that was at times quite overwhelming, right? As you even search for a language that gives life to that which actually needs to be fixed and the scale. And so all I would say is there are, I know we all hold a lot of pride in what we're able to craft together. And I think an equal amount of humility in the ultimate failure of language to capture that, and hope that the kind of emotional resonance of it shone through as much as the kind of the meaning of the specific words.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I could actually just say one more thing, David, before I want to turn over to Amit to see what his experience was in watching all these discussions, you know, come together, and whether that sort of followed with what he expected or or not, in that in learning from our different approaches and our different perspectives, whether we were a warrior, a lover, a missionary, an entrepreneur. I think what it came down to is when we recognize we all have the same end result goal. And then we heard about, okay, the warrior wants to take this sort of approach. Well, the lover or the missionary might think, okay, that's going to only get you so far. But because we hadn't come together to compare different approaches, recognize our shared goal, and then talk about how can we coordinate more effectively, the conversation used to end just there. And now it is, okay, warrior, this is the end goal. This is what you're doing now. If you are able to engage that stakeholder in this way, or work with a partner to engage that stakeholder in this way, you can move that ball even further. And here's how we could help you do that. And or for the lovers or the missionaries, it was a recognition of, we're not going to get as far as we need to go with engagement or working within the system if we don't have the warriors as part of an overall strategy for being that early warning system and that demand for action and accountability that begins to shift the general public narrative of what is needed and ultimately what is possible.
I do want to bring, Amit, I do want you to comment on that, but I also want to bring in, and Meredith, you mentioned Anna Moyo, who was the lead of the whole project, and whether Anna and Chris want to weigh in on this part of it as well. But Amit, this is the vision part that you queued up in your remarks earlier.
So I'm happy to go, and then Anna and Chris, please jump in. But I think one of the things that, just building on these last comments, I think is so important to acknowledge is that to try to tackle systems change for something as big as like the economic system, it definitely requires like a bit of ambition, to say the least, but also requires a lot of humility, because you have to recognize that as hard as you work in whatever kind of realm that you're working in, it's way bigger than anything you can do on your own. And so I think some themes that I just want to lift up that heard from some of my fellow design team members are of this like desire to learn from one another, and to help kind of an intellectual curiosity. Also the idea of trust, right? And how do you build trust amongst people who have very different tactics, and working with very different constituencies in a way that allows space for collaboration. Eli's point, and I think you're starting to press on this early on, David, around the challenge around language, I think is a really big one. If we think about our economic system, we have labels of like capitalism, alternative models, socialism, communism, et cetera, that all have very strong resonance with some people and very strong repulsion amongst other folks. And I think that it's hard to think about what is a space for a better future that's a different future, and but we don't actually have great language for it. And so I think with a vision, we really focused on what that system would accomplish, who it would serve, what it would look like, kind of what were the historic wrongs that needed to be addressed and acknowledged. But the language is a challenge, I think, and I think I have a podcast called The Next Normal that's just interviewing folks who are focused on the future of capitalism, and people who want to change the system. But it ranges from folks who think capitalism is one guest had said it's one of man's greatest inventions, and another said it is kind of irreparably linked to exploitation and oppression, and that's the world that we're living in right now. And how do we actually kind of build a collaborative space of trust and to craft a new vision for a new future with that backdrop, which is this isn't the easiest time to talk about systems change, but it's also, I think, given the volatility we're seeing in the world, my hope is it actually opens up a lot of eyes and appetites for thinking very differently, and that certainly was the case with our group.
Well, let me just press you all on that one more point, and I mentioned this with Carol Ann, but there does seem to be like this moment when people across the spectrum and from different directions think that the system is broken in some way, but yet all of the initiatives, there's a plethora of initiatives, reimagining capitalism, capitalism 2.0, new capitalism, but they all center on capitalism. And as you said, capitalism itself is sort of contested terrain. So I just have found that interesting as this goes forward. And they're also, we're now going to go into the next page, they're all about the thing that's being reinvented, and less about the thing where we're going. So Anna, maybe as we move into the ideas, do you want to just lay out what those criteria were for these ideas, and say a little bit about this process, and we'll dig in a little bit on a couple of the particular ideas.
Sure, I'm happy to. So just to step back for a second to give the folks on the call a sense of what the design team moved through over the 6 months they worked together, was a set of 4 kind of, deceptively simple questions, which is, 1, how is the current system failing? And that diagnosis of problem was relatively easy to get to, although not without a lot of sweat and no tears, but a lot of sweat. Then based on that, what would a better system look like? And we really wanted to move beyond the kind of headlines of, we need a just, sustainable, equitable, regenerative, inclusive economy. Those are all great things, but what does that mean? And what does that look like? What does it mean? How does money look in that? How does business look like in that future? How does investment and capital look like? And so that's some of the aspired future the team developed. Based on that future then, what are some barriers to that future? And really working to surface some of the highest leverage barriers that kind of lock in our entrenched system. And then finally, what are some ideas to really tackle those barriers so we can move towards and manifest that future? So that was kind of the arc of the team's work. And in developing a set of ideas, there was a host of them. We had time to drill down. I would say they're kind of baby notions, right? They're not fully fleshed out, implementable, with full implementation plans and business plans behind them. But they are really a set of ideas that really work around, and hopefully we have time to get into providing color into a few of them, around 3 real kind of interdependent levers for change, right? So the ideas that can really work to change and sustain a different conversation or a different narrative about what an economy that works for all and our planet needs to look like. What are the underlying policies and practices required to support that economy? And the fundamental mindset shifts or beliefs and value shifts that we heard Carol Ann talk about that are needed. So what is that different story we need? Second is a different set of ideas, or ideas around power. Right, which is in the power dynamics, the relationships, the distribution of decision-making power and authority in a system, right? What are those ideas that can demonstrate that the institutions, investors, and corporations that have outsized concentrations of power in this system, which rule our economy, and so drive decisions that impact us all, and again, planet, that these can be challenged and that they operate within systems of power that can be transformed. I think our warriors really brought a lot of powerful insight into kind of intervention pathways and channels into those set of ideas. And finally, ideas of that really target what we think of as the outdated rules and policies and practices that lock in a broken system and that really constrain and inhibit new ways of operating. So as we know about systems change, systems require us to launch not isolated interventions, but much more coordinated interventions, and that we do that simultaneously, right? And if you believe that theory of change to be true, then it really requires a different set of problem-solving approaches and a different way we mobilize to address change, which is really what the New Capitalism Project was meant to model. Both the kind of thinking that we need to engage at a systems level, and also the kinds of problem-solving mobilization we need, right, as agents of impact in the system. So
Great.
hopefully that just sets a little bit of context of how we thought about really building, and it's an initial, and it's, we hold it with a lot of humility. It's an initial and evolving set of ideas that the team has started to really flesh out.
Great. And as I understand, yeah, there's some number, I think it's 7 at the moment, but I suppose that can grow or shrink, but that will, as you say, be fleshed out and presented and run around the field over the course of the next few months and into early next year. And as I understood the three criteria, you may have said something just to reiterate, create momentum towards the shared future that the team has developed, address at least one of the identified barriers, and then this is important, operate at the field level and require more than one organization to implement. So with Anna's input earlier, we picked two of the seven that are sort of on the table at the moment, and the first one has a alliterative title, The Multi-Movement Engine to Shift Power and Corporate Governance. And Eli, I think you are the warrior behind that one. So you want to give us just the brief synopsis of what you're thinking about?
I'll do it as briefly as I can. I am like bursting with excitement to talk about it. And so I am, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to give like a headline of kind of what is this, really quickly give two short examples of like, what do I actually mean? And then kind of what could it look like in the future? Because otherwise this stuff sounds so grandiose. There's no transforming capitalism without confronting harmful corporate behavior. And there's no confronting corporate behavior without taking on the structures of how we hold corporations accountable. And so what we envision is a coordinated effort across all major progressive social movements to be mobilizing grassroots activists to demand fundamental changes in how corporations are governed, and do so in a way that can be achieved through powers and responsibilities that shareholders already have. Now, this rests on a core insight, which is that what counts as responsible corporate governance has never been a fixed thing. It's always been contested. It's always been influenced by what's happening in broader society. It's always been the product of push and pull of power. And so this goes beyond activists and shareholders partnering on resolutions at individual companies, as great as that is. We want to dramatically expand who in civil society sees themselves as having a stake in how corporations are governed, and shift what counts as responsible governance by dragging the most harmful status quo practices of the corporate governance ecosystem into the light, calling out long overdue questions, or calling rather the long overdue questions of what real sustainability demands, and ultimately catalyzing transformational change and what boards are responsible for and how. So you might say that sounds really grand and theoretical. In real life, I mean, not two, but one example. One of the things NCP pushed us to do was to identify those kind of sparks. Anna used to talk about, like, you know, where are you already seeing this happen in the world? And so this is one that comes from our work at Majority Action that goes to show that what I'm describing is already happening, just nowhere near the scale of what's possible. So as this piece really speaks to the concentration of shareholder voting power today and its impacts, as folks here likely and hopefully understand, there is a concentration of shareholder voting power today that is literally unprecedented in the history of capitalism, where just three companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, control 25% of the voting power across the S&P 500, which give them outsized influence over how every corporation of consequence, public corporation of consequence, is governed. But those largest asset managers have heinous track records of using that voting power on every issue we all care about, from climate change to democracy to racial justice and inequality. And so in the aftermath of the 2020 uprisings for racial justice, we campaigned to expose how large asset managers were using that outsized voting power to rubber stamp all white boards, to vote in favor of directors with known track records of outright racism, and to torpedo resolutions that could really shift corporate behavior on every dimension of racial equity and justice, from political spending to diversity and inclusion reporting, to all manner of, to everything between. And so together with our campaign partners at SEIU, we also then organized an unprecedented open letter. It was a full-page ad in the Financial Times from over 140 civil rights leaders and their allies, calling on these asset managers to stop weaponizing the financial resources of BIPOC workers and communities against them, and to finally align their voting with their rhetoric and responsibilities on racial justice. And since then, not only have BlackRock and State Street committed to undertake comprehensive racial equity audits of their own business practices, but BlackRock voted in favor of nearly every shareholder proposal demanding the same thing at companies like Amazon and leading banks. So that's just one example. I'd love to be able to share more of how grassroots action is already demanding fundamental change from the corporate governance ecosystem. Ultimately, we see the potential to build something on the scale of the fossil fuel divestment movement, but for shareholder power, where millions of everyday people around the world are calling on their universities, their pension funds, their 401ks, their cities and states, their religious institutions, to use their shareholder power to hold boards accountable to the highest degree on climate change, racial justice, democracy, and economic inclusion. And we see a tremendous opportunity to campaign not only on each of those issues, but most importantly at their intersection, because the same business as usual corporate governance is driving harm across all those domains. And the same institutional investors that are ultimately accountable to all of us have the power to hold those corporate boards accountable to demands for transformational change. So much more that could be said here, but it's been such an honor to even just be able to start to give voice to it through the New Capitalism Project's umbrella.
There's a lot to dig into, and Eli would be in ImpactAlpha would be happy to dig as deep as you'd ever like into this. But just the one question is, what makes it multi-movement? What is the new thing? I mean, Majority Action and others are doing some of this. What makes this bigger than what is now happening?
This kind of this ecosystem, the corporate governance ecosystem, really creates this just kind of unprecedented opportunity for people to be coming together across kinds of movement formations that always and often speak to how we want to be talking about climate change and racial justice and all of these things at the same time. Well, guess what? We can be by going to all of these institutions that every one of us is proximate to, whether we think of ourselves or not, and saying, we're calling on you to align your proxy voting with all of this, right? And so it enables us to not just build up those standards and build up those demands within each of those domains, but actually create those chances for campaigning groups, grassroots activists, to actually bring them together in real life, in real time at particular institutions.
Terrific.
If I actually may just jump in here, because this is the multi-movement engine. There's another dimension of this, I think, demonstrates how you bring together the warriors, the entrepreneurs, the missionaries, and the lovers. And so when this news broke in April, as the group was meeting, the work of the warriors was really important and critical to seeing this decision by BlackRock to conduct the first ever racial equity audit of how their investment strategies and approaches could be adding to harm. And the response from others of us in the group were, okay, beautiful the work that you're doing there. Now, ask BlackRock to convene their peer group to share the results of the racial equity audit, to share how they went about it, what they learned, and what they're going to do differently in their investment approaches. So rather than having these siloed investment houses be just engaged from the outside, you also have an inside game of sharing of best practices, ideas, and strategies that other investment leaders could learn from and hopefully get ahead of. So that, I think, Eli, I hope that does sort of justice to how you were thinking about the multi-movement engine as well.
Beautiful warrior lover collaboration. And okay, let's obviously there is much more to dig into there, but Amit, you're I think the force behind one that it goes under the headline investing in new business models to move toward an equitable future. Sounds more like an entrepreneur focused from the entrepreneur archetype. Do you want to just say a little bit about what you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and this is, I think, a really important kind of in terms of context, where one of the challenges of thinking about transformational change and how to see models that are quite different from what we see today in terms of issues like governance, kind of employee ownership, relationship with nature and the ecosystem and other and communities, is that most of the resources are controlled by the status quo. And so for any entrepreneur or any kind of entrepreneurial minded person who's trying to build a new model, they have to kind of map themselves to where the resources and assets and legal structures and other things exist to suit the status quo. And every single kind of impact investor, and I'm sure most ImpactAlpha readers are kind of contending with this day in and day out, just given the amount of folks who are trying to build new systems. But one of the challenges that we actually, in addition to trying to shift the sources of power today, we also need to help alternative models of businesses and investment flourish and get enough oxygen and enough nutrients to actually get to a size and scale where they can actually be seen as significant, kind of inspire kind of imagination, help to attract more resources and beyond. And we have many members of the GIN who are interested in this type of work, but I think as it's very hard to get capital at scale. So if you are trying to develop a new regenerative model for a business, or if you're trying to think about an alternative way of engaging employees, whether it's in governance or in ownership, it's very hard to attract capital at scale. And that is part of the idea of this, this fund is to actually help create a model that would aggregate resources from a lot of innovative and entrepreneurial funders and investors to start to capitalize some of these experiments and alternative models at a scale that will actually allow them to stand out in the global ecosystem. And I think that's incredibly critical. Many of us will know that oftentimes the most innovative models are competing for prizes, or going through very long processes where they may get $50,000 prize, they may raise $250,000, but they're not getting the type of scale that we see, for example, Silicon Valley putting into new models across a number of tech and software solutions. So this is really trying to get at that opportunity of what if we were putting kind of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into those alternative models that are going to be the models of the future. And how do we actually seed those today? And so that's the real thinking behind that idea as well.
Well, but Amit, it's sort of the same question, which is, there's lots of investors, many of them members of the GIN, many of them readers of ImpactAlpha, looking for innovative models, some of them even putting catalytic capital to work and being willing to take either risks or lower returns or what have you. Why is this not just another funder out there in a world of funders, and how do you actually shift, somehow the investment equation, decision-making equation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think two big things that this is trying to address. One is fragmentation, and the other is a lack of scale. And so, there are lots of folks who are kind of, doing interesting work and, spread all around the world. And the goal here is to actually aggregate that in a way where it's much more coordinated, but also that it's moving capital at a much greater scale. And also for the innovators, that they can access capital at scale much more efficiently than trying to go retail and collect kind of enough resources. And then, what unfortunately ends up being a very inefficient process. So the idea is really, how do we capitalize the solutions of the future today at a scale that will allow them to succeed and to thrive? And that's the real motivation behind this. And so similar to what you asked around the multi-movement engine campaign of how do we actually adapt what we have today to move things at a much greater scale where they move the needle at a systemic level.
Terrific. I'm going to ask you all in a minute for sort of lessons or takeaways or what you've learned from the experience of the new Capitalism Project. But I do want to, at 5 minutes to the hour, I want to just bring in a couple questions from the chat, and my colleagues have been sifting through them. The chat, I can't keep up with, the chat is going nuts. So one of my favorite things is reading through the chat line after these calls, because it's just incredible, the talent and the ideas here. But Bill Senft says, how is the new Capitalism Project thinking about the indicators of success in the real world experience of humans and other living things? I don't know, indicators of success, I suppose, is the core of that question. How do we know when we're there, or when we're getting there? Any thoughts on that?
I'm afraid I'm talking too much, so I would love to defer if Carol-Ann or Amit or Eli wants to jump in.
Well, Carol-Ann, maybe see if you can take it. I mean, when you're thinking about the people you work with, how will we know that things are getting better?
Thank you for that. I think that I would look at that from an Indigenous perspective of 7 generations, that we take that into account, not in terms of time, but in terms of responsibility and a longer term perspective of accountability, I think, is how we would frame success, that there's an immediacy of the short term, medium, and long term, but impacts are created and perceived through the lens of 7th generation in terms of decision making and structures.
Okay. Okay. Andrea Armeni, one of our favorite systems thinkers, says, what are the day one priorities? And his two are coordination among those working directly on capital, and coordination with those who have historically not engaged with finance as an arena for social change. How do we do that, and who is working on which piece? That's a broad system question, Andrea, that befits your reputation. So does anybody want to take on the day one priorities? Maybe that's contravenes the all hands on deck spirit here.
Here's what I want to say about that. I feel like the collaboration around NCP has actually just lifted up so many powerful like day zero priorities, which is to say that even among the people around the table, we uncovered so many opportunities to be doing exactly some of that kind of stitching together that Andrea was describing. I want to just lift up two things from some of the brilliant colleagues around the table. So as we're doing the work that we're just describing, and doing so in partnership with another one of our table colleagues, Edgar Hernandez, who's at the SEIU, Mahalit, another one of our brilliant colleagues, who leads the racial equity work, corporate racial equity work at PolicyLink,
and was on an earlier one of these Capitalism Reimagined calls.
So as we are pushing for corporations and corporate boards to effectively assume oversight of racial equity and justice inside and through their corporations, Meredith is building up the framework of what does that actually look like, and how does that kind of meet the needs of all the various stakeholders of what does that actually require. And at the same time that that work is kind of pushing what can be done through shareholder power as it looks like today. Andrew Kasoy and Fran Siegel and Meredith have been advancing work in partnership with the White House around what is actually changing some of those rules around stakeholder governance and capitalism really need to look like. And all of these are exploring kind of how do we actually have all of these pieces kind of turbocharge and empower each other and solve for the things that they can't do in and of themselves. So that's at a very kind of base level, that's one of the things that's been so satisfying about the project, is just finding those points of intersection and getting at those kind of day zero priorities of like, let's just get our stuff tight and together and be able to move forward. And every single person around that table, I can guarantee you, would love to be in relationship with any and everyone else who hold other pieces of that jigsaw puzzle as well.
Right, right. And I think that's probably the one of the lessons that I've taken away from this. It's not something that's going to start. There's not going to be any day one. We're already past day one in the sense, and these things are happening. And the question is how to pull them together and amplify them and coordinate them. So let's do this. It's the top of the hour. I know some folks obviously have to go. I do want to give you each a final word, as I promised. I also, before too many people leave, I want to flag that the next and final of the year Agents of Impact call will be 2 weeks from today on Tuesday, December 14th, and it will pull together the reconstruction project that we've been working on all year, and we'll have a lot of background and context for that in the brief over the next couple of weeks. So mark your calendars for Tuesday, December 14th at 1 Eastern, the same time. Amit, I knew you had a hard stop. I don't know if you're still with us. If you want to just have a few lessons or takeaways or next steps, and you can all be very brief because time is running out. And then we'll open the floor up and we'll let people just talk. And I do think the actionable themes is sort of what most people are looking for. So maybe we can do that in the after party.
Thanks, David, and thanks to my colleagues on the design team and partners who have helped drive this project forward. I think just a couple things I'd share as kind of final reflections for now. One is, is that point of that, this is the time where we do need to be ambitious. Our system's not working. It's not working for the vast majority of people. It's not working for the planet. And so I think it's on all of us to take responsibility for, kind of working towards how we can contribute to broader systems change. I also couple that with that point about humility. It's really hard, which means we have to collaborate better and bigger than ever before. And I hope you can you feel that spirit coming through from the design team, of the new Capitalism Project. And I hope, we can embody that at the gym and with all of our partners. And then I think it's really important for us to think about, how do we move some of those structural barriers, which everyone has spoken about, of how do we shift power, how do we kind of rewrite rules, how do we kind of make sure that other voices are represented in decision making. But this is, I think, an incredibly exciting time, and I'm humbled and grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with this group.
Great. Who wants to jump in next?
I would just say that we're all humbled and grateful to have been brought together, thanks to Omidyar and other backers, to Amit for the idea, and to Anna for dealing with all of us and putting up with us over the last year plus. It's just been a real honor to be able to work with each other and to really find that sense of community that before had been lacking, and that hopefully will make us all the more strategic. I think we talk about what's day one, what's the focus now. I think we all recognize that all these ideas are very good ones, but it's going to take both private sector and public sector coordination for the scale change that is needed. And I think from where I sit, recognizing the inflection point that we're in, having a positive social impact before this inflection point was something only nonprofits really thought about. Following this inflection point, and our work is meant to abet the rapid transition through this inflection point, having a positive social impact as a regular part of pursuing profit will be a trait of the most valued and successful companies. That's, I think, what we're all sort of pushing toward in our different ways of getting there, that positive social impact has to be a regular part of how business is done for capitalism to be sustainable and truly to be the enabling force that I think that we all aspire for it to be.
Eli, is there anything crying out to be said?
I want to say one last thing about the name, if I may, which is it harkens back to the work of a brilliant academic named Lawrence Goodwin, who wrote about the agrarian revolts in the United States, the multiracial agrarian revolts in the late 1880s. And
The Populist Moment is the book.
Yes, exactly. And he wrote, and it has stuck with me ever since, is that there existed a time when the number of what we thought of as political economic possibilities was greater than 2. And that the kind of efforts that materialized spanned the gamut of cooperative efforts and new kinds of business models and formations, and contestations with existing corporate power, and laying claims on domains of policy, including monetary policy, that people did not imagine everyday people to ever put forward a claim to ever before, and doing so for a window in time in ways that actually bucked the forces that sought to continue to divide working class people and farmers by race in order to perpetuate the power structures that existed. And so one of the things I just want to lift up as we think about names and words is that all of these things can coexist together. And when they do, they can all be more powerful for it. And so just inviting us all to kind of step in as we imagine what that new is, to step into a view of the new that can expand beyond even the kind of binaries that we hold, and really be focused instead on the transformation we want to see. Tremendously grateful to Omidyar, to ImpactAlpha, and especially to Anna for holding us through this.
Thank you. And Carol Ann, some final thoughts?
Thank you. I think this was a powerful exercise in evolutionary creatism. The creative dynamic in terms of transformational change and bringing multiple perspectives together was so important in this moment. And I think my grandma would essentially say, it's time to grow up and take responsibility. And I think that's what this was an exercise in, of evolving our conversation and perspectives to this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chris, I'll give you the last word if you want to take it.
Just echoing back the gratitude to our New Capitalism Project participants today, those who were part of this journey that didn't join on the call today, all doing fantastic work. I think this conversation illuminated their vision and thoughtfulness in driving this change that everybody on this call is focused on. I'm excited for everyone on this call to be able to engage more in the work that's been done by this group. It's a really compelling vision that we're aiming towards, that I think we can find unity in across the movements working for this change, and the big ideas that we've started to put on the table here as well. So couldn't be prouder to have been a small part in supporting this work, and thanks to everyone today for the engagement.
Terrific, terrific. So we'll have a video replay, a YouTube link for this call. If you want to tell your friends about it, we'll have a roundup post on Friday in the brief and on ImpactAlpha, and then we'll be covering the New Capitalism Project and the particular ideas, and all the people obviously are all agents of impact, so they'll be in the pages of ImpactAlpha over time. I think, Isaac, maybe cue up some music, and then we'll go into what we call the after party or the happy hour, and we encourage everybody to stick around, but I'll try to keep myself on mute and let the conversation flow. Yangbo, just hold you're a stalwart of that, but just hold on for just a second and let the room settle for a moment, and we'll go to the next stage. So thank you everybody for coming. Stay tuned, stay here if you like, and obviously leave if you have to, but that's the end of the formal program. So.